The Joining the Dots podcast focuses on the many challenges facing education and how different approaches and innovations are needed to meet those challenges.
Join co-hosts Matt Jessup and Elle Kingsley as they have discussions with innovative educators, business leaders, policymakers, and other stakeholders, and guests looking at transforming the future of education.
Morning, Miles.
Good morning to you, Matt.
Apologies for the most American jingle ever. I think it's the cheesiest American jingle ever. But so we've
Are
got
these the same people who as do the Notebook LM Deep Dive podcast? Because they do sound very similar.
the same two voices. Yeah, it does actually, doesn't it? So thank you for joining us this morning. I mean, I sort of did a bit of research on you last night, and we've spoken before about data science, wasn't it, in primary schools and things. But I mean, I know you are quite the voice in education, in initial teacher training, computer science, artificial intelligence, and I think you're a professor at, I want to say Roehampton University, but have they got that right?
Yeah, that's it.
But you sort of bridge all these things, and education, nothing else, needs to bridge technology more and more, I think. So thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
I've got a nice opening question, which is brutally short, Al, sorry. Is our initial teacher training framework fit for purpose, given technology and advancements and things?
Well, the current edition doesn't mention technology at all. And here we are in 2025, and the curriculum that we have to teach at Roehampton, that all other teacher training providers in England have to deliver, is prescribed by the Department for Education and covers all 8 of the teacher standards and does a good job of those things. But this absence of any reference to technology, I think, leaves it a bit hit and miss as to how well beginning teachers are prepared for the realities of life in not only their placement schools, but also their teaching career. The good news is that DfE are fixing this for next September, so the next edition does include, at last, some reference to technology there in the preamble and about sort of weighing evidence and making judicious use of technology. It doesn't actually make it into the learn that and learn how to statements, apart from one particular area. It's a really important area. So in the section on adaptive teaching, there is reference to the use of technology to support children with SEND in terms of accessing the curriculum and making progress in the curriculum, and indeed in the learn how to statements about making use of that technology to support children with SEND. I very much welcome that. I think that's great, but it doesn't go nearly far enough when you consider all of the ways in which teachers are making use of technology, in which teachers have to make decisions about technology in their teaching and their pupils' learning. So I think we need to think about doing that again properly for the next edition after this 2025 one takes effect.
Miles, can I jump in? Because I certainly prescribe with you. One of the challenges is we keep thinking of technology and then trying to put it in very specific boxes, whether it's a particular cohort of our learners and how that technology can be used with equity, which is all great. And like you say, it's good progression, but doesn't go nearly far enough. Is there, do you think, perhaps a perception that if we acknowledge the role of technology and the accompanying skills too much when it comes to the training phase, we're also identifying that actually there's a lacking element within the curriculum itself in terms of the curriculum's recognition of technology and skills as being an important part of the overall package, for want of a better term?
So DfE have been very reluctant to formally prescribe how kids should learn things. They're very happy in national curriculum documentation to specify what it is that pupils should learn. And indeed, when you see this in GCSE and A-level specifications, there's a pretty good list of content there. But what they have been reluctant to say is the particular ways of approaching that. I think we see some change in that, and certainly what we have with core content framework and early career framework is the DfE intervening in questions of pedagogy. But that seems to be at a relatively high level. Leaving it up to individual schools and indeed in many cases individual teachers to think about how to teach these things, I think is tremendously empowering for professionals and saying, look, you know what you're doing, take this responsibility on. But it does lead to a very patchy picture there, that if you happen to be working in a school which is really doing amazing things with integrating technology into every aspect of its life, if you're working in a multi-academy trust which is doing a similar sort of thing at trust, at scale, that's great for you. But we know that that's definitely not the case across the country. That's certainly not the case in all of the partner schools that Roehampton works with. And a little bit more consistency, a little bit of taking the best practice that's happening and making sure that that's much more embedded across all schools rather than just those, I suppose, not quite isolated cases. Because, there are a lot of good schools doing very good things with this, but there are ways of those who hold the levers of power making sure that that's done a little bit more consistently for the benefit of all kids, really.
I mean, taking the same question a bit differently then. I mean, Estonia is a bit of a fascination of mine. Been speaking to people in Uruguay recently, where in Uruguay the government said to educators, actually, you run education. Is the Department for Education a barrier to everything? Is it substandard itself? Because it seems to be a barrier in terms of technology. It seems to be a barrier in terms of accountability, assessment, all sorts of things. Are there people at a higher level within that, having been in those positions for a long time now, should be moved on?
I'd be very reluctant to see it in those terms. I think there are some really smart people working in sanctuary buildings who absolutely have the best interests of the nation's children at heart. We have a relatively conservative, small c system here, which is relatively reluctant to change. Look at how we're still teaching primary school history. What is this, 10, 12 years on from the new primary history curriculum? It takes a long time to change what happens in school. So I think that the folks I know who work in the DFE have absolutely the best interests of teachers, of pupils at heart. But there is a stickiness in the education system here. Estonia, much, much smaller country. I've done no work with Uruguay. I have done work with South Korea. When South Korea chose to put software education, as they call it, onto their national curriculum, or the equivalent of a national curriculum there, they were absolutely confident that the minister says, this is what children should learn, and within a year, this is exactly what children are going to be taught, and the schools adopt this and adapt to this very, very quickly. That doesn't seem to happen quite so much in England. So, yes, there are levers of power, but I'm not sure how well they are connected to actually anything, really.
I love the credit to you, the diplomacy there, because we know that...
diplomatic.
Well, I think the problem and the challenge sometimes is that almost everybody involved in the edu space is well-intentioned and is trying to move things forward. But that stickiness, that treacle sometimes is just the byproduct of systems. Now, occasionally, and it's not necessarily a space that I dabble in too much, we do have these conversations at more of a political level where we're looking for short wins. We're looking for signposts of impact. That's not unique to education, but often an electoral cycle limits anyone's ambitions. But that doesn't distill one layer below. We have those working in local government who are trying to do the right things. The challenge, I think, on this is, and I really respect your diplomacy in recognising there's always those positive efforts to try and move forward, is we're constantly looking at ways to adapt without recognising that at a much faster level, what an employer, what the future workplace is looking for, is creating far greater pressure on how quickly the curriculum needs to adapt than we're willing to reflect back and look. And maybe there's this challenge, and I'm interested with your experience. We like to do things that are evidence-informed. We like to do things once we've got real certainty that they're going to have purpose and pedagogical impact. And yet we've got such a rate of change and a focus with employers wanting very much the soft skills, which are now the power skills, much like the OECD's moving towards the human flourishing kind of mindset. Do you see us recognising that as well as needing to integrate computing skills and flexibility and how we deliver the curriculum, there's actually a question mark about the content of the curriculum that isn't sufficiently skills aware or skills driven?
Okay. I'll come back to curriculum in a moment. It's just worth thinking about this how we adapt quite so flexibly as we need to now. And it's worth distinguishing between education and schooling. The locus of where education happens, I think, has moved considerably beyond the classroom now. If you look at how most young people learn things, this isn't so much confined to the classroom as it was in my day many, many years ago. And even in my day, there were local libraries, and it was perfectly possible for somebody who was literate and interested and motivated to teach themselves, pretty much anything. This is so true these days, though. I look at what my daughter will do with technology and how quickly she can pick things up from watching, yes, the ridiculous tickety-tock videos, but also so much access to content. And AI is hugely empowering for that self-motivated learner. So, yeah, there is plenty that we should do through the school system, through the formal education system, but it's also worth recognizing how quickly young people themselves adapt to new technologies and new opportunities for learning. So, yeah, curriculum. And I'm quite focused on what's happening around curriculum and assessment review. And we look forward to the report. Perhaps by the time this goes live, it may already have been published, the interim version of this, as to where we're heading with this. The terms of reference say this is very much about evolution than revolution, but I know of well-trusted voices who say, at least in some aspects of this, it is time for revolution. It is time for thinking about how we do this a little bit differently for the benefit of all of the nation's young people and indeed the nation's future. We've had a lengthy period now where we've emphasised the importance of knowledge as part of the curriculum, this notion of a knowledge-rich curriculum. The 2002 Education Act says that school curriculum, that even the national curriculum, must prepare pupils for the opportunities, responsibilities and experiences of later life. I think it's possible to argue that that sense of what they will be is changing so very, very quickly now. Partly this is a technology thing, partly this is societal change, partly this is about sustainability and environmental climate change, I think. It may no longer be the case that the best way to prepare pupils for those opportunities, responsibilities, experiences is simply to pass on the best of our generation to the next generation. There may be a case for making this a little bit more future-facing, a little bit more sort of, what are we going to need to do? And it's really hard to do that in an evidence-based way, because if you're thinking about what we need for what comes next, simply looking at the randomized control trials that we've already done may not be enough for that. So I think there is a license there to innovate, to experiment, to try different approaches out in a way which pays regard to evidence, which says, look, this is the opportunity to do an experiment, a pilot study here. Let's see whether this is valuable. First do no harm, but also one's looking for things which are better than what we are doing at the moment. Some of that is about what we teach. Some of that is definitely about how we teach. I have no problem with a knowledge-rich curriculum. I think what I'm looking for in the next edition is a knowledge-based but thinking-rich curriculum, which is much more about encouraging our pupils, our students, to learn to think for themselves rather than just being spoon-fed so they will do very well in their GCSEs and A-levels, important as exam results are. And something which recognises that as well as knowledge, there are skills and attitudes and behaviours which really matter, and which school, despite my previous remarks about it's not the only place where education happens, school is really good at developing those skills, at taking pupils on with their skills, what apparently we have been supposed to call procedural knowledge, as well as the attitudinal behavioural shifts, which I think is a really important part of education. Forgive me if I waffle.
It's fascinating, to be honest. Just going back to the idea of, what word do you use? I want to say leniency, innovation in schools and things. Is it not an argument that to build an evidence base, they're going to have to give schools quite a lot of leeway to actually innovate and change things, and as part of that they're going to have to reduce the sheer size of the national curriculum, because it's farcical to think that any school can actually cover it in its current format and actually do anything additional. So you get various schools doing some brilliant stuff, and you think they're abandoning the national curriculum 50% of the time, and the skills they're teaching as part of that are great. So
paragraph 3.2 of the current edition says there is time and space in each school, week, day, week, month, year, to range beyond the confines of the national curriculum. And would that it were so, really.
Yeah.
I don't think this is about curriculum. I think this is about assessment more than anything else. I know your school is different, Matt, but you look at the Year 6 timetable in far too many primary schools. And, if they are doing anything other than English and maths in that half term before the very important school accountability measures of the SATs, I would be very surprised. It's such a shame, it really is. And you will see that sort of moving towards English and maths through, even from the end of Year 5 onwards. And the same thing happens up in secondary school. Of course it does. Key Stage 4 has got a much broader curriculum than what actually happens in secondary school. So citizenship is there as a curriculum subject for all of Key Stage 4. Computing, close to my own heart, is there as a national curriculum subject for all of Key Stage 4. But we know that in most schools, the only thing that gets taught up in Key Stage 4 is the stuff which pupils will be entered for GCSEs. Assessment drives so much of what happens. And again, I don't think anybody intended it to be this way. But once you sort of have the accountability measures, which become very, very high stakes, that which we measure becomes that which we value. And really, wouldn't it be nice if we could just think about what we actually value in education and come up with some interesting and innovative ways of measuring that?
This sounds like a convenient segue for an advert, which is not intended. But I've spent the last year researching with my roles in different education establishments around the world about what actually makes a good school, amongst other things, under my umbrella of the awkward questions in education. And there is a mindset, which I think links beautifully with what you were sharing there, Miles, is that the sense is that what we're measured on in the formal sense becomes the focus and attention because there's pressure on it. Yet, if we walk into any of our schools, whether it's schools in my trust, Matt's amazing school, or any school, and we speak to leadership about their school, the things they convey with most pride, with most impact, the things that are most unique and positive in their schools are rarely the same things that sit on the checklist of formal capability of a school in its all-round sense. And so there is this sense about, because we have quite rigid expectations and measures now, and I argue that goes all the way up because governments want to be, whether it's the PISA rankings or whatever, they want some measure to say how well are we doing, even if they all accept that measure is somewhat limited and restrictive and certainly applies and benefits a certain cohort of learners. So when we talk about these curriculum bits and your recognition that sometimes there's a bit of a focus, whether it's the SATs window or the pre-GCSE focus, how do we shift the dial? Because there's lots of people talking about we need a broader curriculum. We need, without losing content and context, we need a greater skills breadth. We need a curriculum that suits some learners that struggle with the traditional method of teaching and learning and exams, those high stakes testing, that is linked perhaps to a challenge of getting enough children to come into school and see that they've got an opportunity to succeed. How do we start to
jump in, sorry, there. Just when you reference those children, whether you look at SATs or GCSEs, those children is a third.
Yeah.
It's 36, 37, 38%. So we're not talking a few thousand of, disengaged children. We're talking a third.
No.
It's huge.
But how do we start to shift that conversation to say it's not that what we currently do is bad, it's that we need to broaden this to make it more relevant and purposeful, either for our learners or for a changing world. And that's a difficult one. But given your diplomatic skills, Miles, I'm interested to see whether you think actually, you know what, we are moving, guys, it's just not that visible yet, or whether you think there needs to be a greater push.
So I think one of the themes that's run through the whole of my career thus far in education has been about the value of autonomy. And I think that's, for me, what lies at the heart of the purpose of education is about equipping young people to take charge of their lives, to be empowered to do the best that they can be, to do the best that they can for the benefit of themselves, but also for the benefit of others and for society. And this is about empowerment. This is about a sense of teaching well, so they feel confident in achieving all that they can possibly do. So preparing them for taking on that responsibility for making the world a better place. But I think this works at school level too. And so the issues around academisation, I do not want to go into in this podcast, but the vision that lay behind that right at the start was empowering state schools to take much more charge of their curriculum, their policies around learning and teaching, their hiring policies, the conditions for the teachers working there. And, maybe it's not all worked out quite as we initially intended. And when you think about the academy, the autonomy that head in an academy perhaps has compared to what it once was or what once was envisaged, there may be a disconnect there. But I think the original vision was a noble one. And it would be nice to see a little bit more freedom around that, or a recognition of the freedom there. I feel conflicted around this because I like the idea that the national curriculum ought to be an entitlement for all pupils. But I think it's such a shame that the curriculum innovation that we have seen in a number of academies, of free schools, multi-academy trusts, then gets removed because of this desire that national curriculum should apply to all. It is a really tricky one. And I think the way forward, the way to reconcile it, is to bring national curriculum back to the original intention of was it the original intention? To the intention of, here is the minimum specification, here is the entitlement, the equivalent, if you will, of the building regs, that we ensure that every pupil is prepared for these things. And of course, English is going to go on there. Of course, maths is going to go on there. I would kind of like at least some digital skills to be on there as well as, and, more than just skills.
Yeah.
But there's then allowing scope beyond that initial building reg for the architect, for the designer to think of something which works in that particular local context, which embodies their creative vision, their ideas for what works, and particular approaches to doing this sort of thing. And I think that builds up the agility that we would be looking for in the system as we move forward.
That's just, I'd love a simple 50-50 model. 50% of the time you have to do this, this and this. 50% of the time, innovate. Fit your local environment,
I love the idea of was it Google who had the 20% time that, if you're an engineer working for Google, then, one of your days a week, you get to work on your own choice of project, using all of the firm's facilities. And there are some lovely stories of, products which seem now so core to Google's core business model. Gmail, I'm told, came out of that sort of 20% time. And I remember back in my teaching days, this notion of, Thursday afternoon, we don't follow so much timetable. We give pupils the opportunity to do something which is much closer to an independent research project, pursuing their own interests and helping to cultivate that sort of love of learning. So I think it would be nice to do that more than just on a Thursday afternoon, but at the very least, one afternoon a week where we actually give pupils themselves some say about what they are learning.
5 afternoons a week.
With grown-ups, we know that. But, I like the idea, Matt, of some of the time during the school week, head teachers devolve some of the responsibility for what actually gets taught to teachers themselves. And for secretaries of state to say, this takes up about, 50% would be lovely, Matt, I'm sure, but,
never going to happen.
Takes up 70% of the school week. The other 30%, we absolutely let trust leaders, let head teachers decide what they are going to do with that time. I think, why not do it that way? I can think of reasons why not, but
it definitely would work. But in the meantime, certainly across secondaries, let's make sure we fill up our EBAC buckets first before we have any other consideration and the challenges that go.
And I feel EBAC as an accountability measure has really been detrimental. Sorry, this does get us a little bit more political. I've got no problem with Progress 8. I think, being able to track how well kids have done, given their incoming SATs results with their GCSE results, it seems a broad brush, reasonable accountability measure. EBAC, just such bizarre decisions around there. We lobbied hard, or BCS lobbied hard to get computer science included as an EBAC subject. And of course, it gets put with the other sciences, but you have to do all three sciences. You have to do physics, chemistry, biology to be national curriculum compliant. And so, there are very few pupils who actually make use of computer science counting as an EBAC subject. And when you get into those humanities, that humanities bucket, yes, history counts, yes, geography counts, but bizarrely, religious studies doesn't count. What skills, what knowledge is covered over in the history curriculum that is not similar, as a skill at least, covered in the religious studies curriculum? Classical civilizational, classics, doesn't count as an EBAC subject, but history does. And I think it's the list that they have put together seems a particularly hard one. But anyhow, you've got me started.
These things. I like these kind of conversations because these things all come from a well-intentioned position. Nobody did it mischievously, thinking this is what we want to do to harm the process. But we have a conversation about inclusivity and about a curriculum that suits all our learners. And you look at EBAC and say, even just down to the conversation around languages, which we all accept are important skills, but that in itself can make it very difficult. Your schools are making decisions about putting learners into buckets, into qualifications that they're unlikely to achieve at, whereas there are others that potentially, as we move on, have a far more potential skills and benefits to them in later life. In fact, this new, very much technology-driven world that's changing at pace, for good or bad, depending on perspectives and what we're focusing on, I've always argued levels the playing field a little bit, that actually those most human skills become more dominant. And that means that it's not just the most academic and able that have the opportunity to succeed. But in the context of curriculum and adapting, you alluded to the fact, that computing, something a real passion, an area of experience and focus for you, something both Matt and I are very, very focused around: digital skills, digital competencies, computing. What do you say to somebody who says right now, well, we'll give it another 12 months and AI tools will be doing all the coding, so that it's no longer relevant? Push back.
The argument right at the start was not, we need to teach the nation's children how to code so that they can all go and get jobs in the software industry. That's Absolutely. Not why we include stuff in a national curriculum. Plenty of opportunity comes for that later in terms of vocational training and degree study and all of that. This is much more about the foundational knowledge that somebody needs to flourish in modern society. And given the role that technology plays in all of our lives, and which looks set to increase rather than if it's going to change in any sort of way, then some understanding of how this technology is made, some understanding of what it can do and what it can't do seems essential to that process. Yeah. And in my mind, the best way of acquiring that understanding is by actually having a go at making some of these things yourself, that sort of foundational knowledge. We've all got calculators, but we still teach pencil and paper arithmetic because somehow going through the process yourself gives you an insight into mathematics, into how numbers work, that is essential for being able to use the technology tools. So we include poetry on the national curriculum, not because we need more professional poets, but because this is about an appreciation of language, of human creativity, and also a medium in which to express that creativity oneself. To be able to instruct the machine to write some code for you, it helps to know how code works and what to do with that. So I think I can make a reasonably strong case. Yeah. We need to keep programming. We certainly need to keep this computational thinking ideas on the national curriculum as we move forward. Just teaching kids how to use generative AI isn't really enough for equipping them to make the best use of technology in the future.
So could we argue in an ever technology world, actually computing and those critical thinking and the way that things work moves from being optional to actually, if we want our learners and our workforce of the future to have agency, is actually now an essential. It needs to be a prerequisite for everybody at all stages.
Well, it's there on the national curriculum as things stand. It's there actually up until the end of Key Stage 4, but we didn't do a particularly good job of specifying what should
Is it the
happen
right stuff, though?
Key Stage 4. Oh, well, yes, quite, because this is a field which changes very, very quickly. The computing that pupils are learning about in school now is really quite close to the cutting edge of the discipline of computing. I don't think that's necessarily the case over in history or maths education, where there's quite a gap between where, you know, the edge of that subject discipline is and what happens in school. It's different, I think, in computing. So I think some of this is about content. A lot of this is, I think, around assessment. So I certainly never intended for GCSE ICT to be removed from the list of available qualifications. It needed reform, certainly. But that idea of the two pathways at age 14, go and do ICT or carry on with the computer science, was not a bad way of doing this back at the start of this particular journey. What I'd like to see now is a new GCSE covering the whole of computing. And yeah, having that up to date, having enough flexibility in there and keeping the cycle a relatively quick one, bringing in a lot of the AI, certainly bringing in some of the data science, bringing in the really important moral and ethical dimension of this, which is there in the current curriculum over in the relationships and sex education requirements of curriculum, but that never gets examined, and so the extent to which it gets taught is left for people to decide for themselves, I guess. So yeah, what I'd love to see coming through this curriculum and assessment review is a new GCSE in computing, which at least 80% of schools could expect at least 80% of their kids to take. So there, alongside English and mathematics, as something which everybody gets a qualification in, or almost everybody gets a qualification in at the age of 16. That's a long way away. And if we have to lose GCSE computer science to make room for a GCSE in computing fit for all pupils, then I don't think that's too high a price to pay.
I mean, you mentioned curriculum and assessment with it in that, but you didn't mention accountability. And I think accountability and continuity are two things that jumped out there to me. One is, until Ofsted come in and want to see and have the knowledge when they come in and want to see and understand what wonderful things children can do using technology if they're taught properly from a young age, it's never going to be a focus for schools.
It's so sad, isn't it, that teachers, head teachers, math leaders see their principal accountability as to our friends at Ofsted.
I'm not against accountability, but...
So, yes, this is about, getting the grades and Ofsted recognising that. But really, this is about young people's lives, young people's futures. And I think moving the conversation to what is genuinely in the best interests of these young people, rather than what do Ofsted want to see when they come and visit. Now, the two should be absolutely aligned. Of course, the two should be aligned. And, the way to get that alignment is for Ofsted to actually move towards considering what is the most important thing for young people, what is actually in their long-term best interests. And I don't think Ofsted are unconcerned about that, but that the empowerment of learners, that learners flourishing, learners going on to do very, very well in their lives beyond school doesn't seem to feature very highly in what inspectors come and ask about and look for. But
I think it's what they understand as well, though, don't you think? In that if you're an Ofsted inspector, I would very generally say you're of a certain age because you've got that experience behind you. But actually the kids now are growing up from the age of 2 or 3. There was some report a few weeks ago about 7% of 2-year-olds now use a tablet or something, and beggars belief, really. But
I need to get the PDF up in front of me and do Control F on this. But the last time I checked, the only reference to technology in Ofsted's inspection framework, inspection handbook, was something around the lines of And inspectors may use technology to record their conversations with teachers and pupils. There's no recognition about how that is being, the choices that are being made by school leaders, by teachers, by pupils about the use of technology. There's no recognition about whether the technology choices that have been made are actually ones which are helpful to the learning and teaching process. And, perhaps that's something which, as we look towards revision of the Ofsted frameworks and handbooks, there ought to be some mention of good use of technology.
Same thing with, if you got the inspection reports for 200 primary schools and you did Control F and said technology, you would find very, very, very few references to the point where we were actually told, that's not national curriculum, we can't report on that. But just come back to the GCSE idea.
Other things that they choose to report on.
None of which parents are interested in. But I mean, this idea of continuity always gets to me. Like, we've got a cramped curriculum. We've got daughters in year 7 and 9 who are repeating things we've taught in years 4, 5 and 6. But when you talk about whether it's maths or computing, I'm very jealous of schools that are 3 to 18. Because they can put in place this brilliant curriculum that's got continuity across it, and they can put the building blocks in for misinformation, for coding, for 3 and 4 year olds. You can teach kids in year 1 how to use Scratch, and yet it's still on the national curriculum in secondary schools because it's a building block. So
literally, in that case, yes,
literally, because that's the strength of it, isn't it? Really, but just the lack of continuity is something I think is a real barrier to national curriculum education.
Some of this is about curriculum designers and the people who write the national curriculum not breaking into small teams to, you'll do the primary bit, we do the secondary bit sort of conversation, but actually thinking through what does curriculum progression look like from early years up to 18 and beyond. Let's think about lifelong learning and skills and higher education as part of a much broader sense of curriculum continuity. Some of this is also down to delivery and actually primary schools teaching the whole of the national curriculum so that those taking on kids into secondary school can have some assurance that the kids have all covered the content of the national curriculum prescribed for key stages 1 and 2. Some of this is also about assessment information. And, a year 7 maths or English teacher who gets told that these kids got, age-related expectations or working beyond it, or whatever the current phrasing is, or their standardized scale score, being told this kid got 115 in their maths SATs does not tell the year 7 teacher whether the kid can multiply 2 fractions together or whether they can do long multiplication by hand. This is not a difficult thing anymore to actually have granular assessment information being passed on from one school to another, being something which is there for the child. It's their data. We have this information somewhere in the system about they were taught this, they did very well on that. But finding some way to actually pass that on, and indeed secondary school teachers trusting that information, as you have in too many secondary schools at the moment. Yes, you have the SAT scores from primary schools, but we're now going to make them do their CATS test because we did not trust the primary school teachers and we don't trust that data. So a little bit of trust in the system might help with continuity and progression as well.
We could go around this topic for ages. It's really insightful listening to you, Miles, because, immediately I'm resonating for the secondary schools of my cluster. Yes, we agree about Progress 8 being a fair measure, but only if you have confidence on the inbound rating on which you're going to measure your progress. And there's ecosystem, isn't it? Anyway, I'm really mindful. We're coming to the end of this recording, which we probably should have done as a 3 or 4-parter with you. But what we like to do is pass over the virtual magic wand. Where do you see, where would you prioritize your focus or efforts around curriculum, design, computing? What are the hot things that you would really like to put front and center right now?
So I'm very much focused on the short to medium term with this. So my particular interest at the moment is retaining computing as a national curriculum subject. This is the way to use the national curriculum structure to make sure that all pupils are equipped with the, digital skills, but also the underpinning knowledge and that overarching understanding of the ethical and moral implications of this these technologies. So I want computing to be retained as part of the national curriculum and taken seriously as an entitlement for all pupils from 5, certainly as far as 16. And I think we also ought to be thinking about what happens in that 16 to 18 space around computing. Because, yes, A-level is fine, but that's a very niche qualification. And similarly with BTEC and T-levels. But this is drifting off topic for now. So that's part of the picture. And I think the best way to do that is this idea of let's reform what happens at GCSE. Let's move away from GCSE computer science, because there are huge issues in terms of gender equity with this, in terms of the delivery of this subject across different socioeconomic bands, and indeed the uptake of this qualification. So move away from GCSE computer science. Start from something which actually recognises the full breadth of computing and spin that up as a qualification which we could reasonably expect most kids to have a go at the age of 16.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. Matt, any closing thoughts from your point of view? I should put some brackets on that because there could be 100 from you.
No, I'm just thinking we should make Miles the Education Secretary in the next rehash of government or something.
Got my vote. There's a vote there, yeah.
I love my teacher training job very much. If they could do it as like a part-time secondment, I'm very, very happy to take on some of those responsibilities.
I'm just conscious. I haven't...
Well, you heard it here
about AI and all sorts, but we've run out of time, haven't we? So,
happy to come back and do another review.
There you go then. Yeah,
more about AI. That's not a problem for me.
That sounds like a perfect opportunity for us to get another conversation with you.
Yeah.
Most importantly, thank you for giving up your time, sharing your insights, and a huge congrats and continuing to fly the flag for computing and technology and education. Huge admirer of the work and the ambassadorial role that you play in that space. So keep flying the flag, sir.
Thank you both very much. It's been a joy this morning. It really has. Thank you.